Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to our Sunday service. It's nice to be sharing this time with you all. For those who don't know us, I'm Swami Daiva, and this is Swami Gangamata. So they say that a person who is good with a hammer, to such a person, the whole world looks like a nail. And I was thinking about the topic this morning, and I realized that, or this week, I realized that it would be really good to actually look up the definition of devotion, which is the whole problem in the first place. If you read with your intellect, you're already in trouble. But I did, and I was a little surprised at some of the definitions. So one of them comes up with love, loyalty, or enthusiasm for a person, activity, or cause. It goes into religious worship or observance. But then Merriam-Webster has some more to say. A feeling of strong love or loyalty, a quality of being devoted. The use of time, money, energy, etc. for a particular purpose. The fact or state of being ardently dedicated and loyal. I started thinking about how does that fit into today and into the search for meaning in a world that seems increasingly to be wobbling between influences, forces, and thought patterns. You know, we are here to try and find joy. And if you really boil down anybody's efforts in life, whatever they're doing, regardless of how they're trying to pick it up, you could find that every single person is trying to simply find joy. And they're trying to find it in a lasting manner. They're trying to find it in a way that is consistent and meaningful across time. And I would be willing to bet that people would like it to be infinitely deep, have it connected to love, have it connected to meaning and wisdom and the power of control of their own life and calmness and peace, a sense of wholeness. I'll bet you they would like to have it connected to sound and light, being as those are the fabric of creation, and most of us reach for those things intuitively. And it's interesting, you know, we have a few people here in the congregation who are either by birth or by age have a hard time hearing, sight can fade and stuff, but the functions of the capacity for hearing and the capacity for seeing are much deeper than the physical organs that allow those to happen. There's a beautiful book by a Frenchman who was blind, and he ended up, he became blind as a young man, and he writes about people came to him after he became blind, and they spoke to him about how sad they were and sorry for him for his loss. And he said he couldn't understand what they were talking about because it wasn't until he lost the function of his eyes that he actually began to see. And that he could see sounds, he could see lights and subtlety that had never been available to him as long as he was operating through the physical and outward organs. We are so much more. We are so much more than we can ever perceive through the senses. And we are hungry for that connection to life. We are starving for that connection to wholeness. We are, if you listen and believe the masters, it's a little mind-boggling, but intuitively we get it, that we are in fact the infinite, and that all things exist not out there but in here. But we have to turn off the noise of the senses. We have to turn off the sense of separateness that comes from ego, from identity of ourselves as individual, disconnected from everything else. And simply it can't be done through the mind. It simply can't be done. I have a fairly strong intellect. And it was a primary tool of navigation through life as a young person. It wasn't the only one, but it was certainly the one I trotted out the most. And it was the one that was most reinforced by our culture. And so I went to college, and I was a good little scientist and lab rat and stuff. And I realized that just simply having knowledge, having information wasn't going to do it. But I couldn't figure out the rest of the components. I could feel, and we're going to come to this here in a few minutes, I could feel in nature. I could feel in backpacking. I could feel in the quiet times of my life a connection to something much greater. But I couldn't resolve how that fit into the pattern of life. It was always something aside, something apart. And when I came to the path, I came to it with a deep and profound yearning, which everybody here, I'm sure, relates to. But I didn't know how to pick it up. And I would periodically write Swami Kriyananda with a question. And, I'd be puzzling about something, I'd be struggling with something, and I'd write him. And I would say invariably his answer was, love God. Develop devotion. And, I knew he wasn't an idiot. I knew he was, not just trying to give a simplistic answer, but it took me a long time to understand that the definitions, the mind is not, by design, it is not intended to lead our lives. It's a tool that can support our relationship to life, but it cannot lead because it doesn't have the tools, it doesn't have the resources. It's not how it's built. It can justify, explain, rationalize, put pieces together, help us navigate at that level, but it can never fill in the gaps of experience that it needs to lead, that it needs to have leading it. And so I don't know, this tends to be more of a guy problem than a gal problem, but it's also a gal problem sometimes. When I came to the path, it just seemed really soppy and kind of, people would sit around and just chant the same thing over and over and over and over. And, it was all about flowers, and it was all about hugging, it was all about, all kinds of things that were, a little bit foreign to my nature. And they would talk about devotion. I loved truth. I loved truth. I loved trying to understand more. But when I would go into the kirtans, I felt something happening, and it looked lovely, but I had a hard time entering into the chanting. I had a hard time entering into the group prayers. I had a hard time entering into the form that was presented. But gradually what happened was I would attend the morning meditations and the evening meditations, and then we folded them into the noon part of our work. And there was always chanting included in it, and there was always prayer included in it. It wasn't the major part, but it was always there. What I started to find across time was that something started to connect inside, something started to open and unfold. And that it was tied, I started to discover that it was tied directly to the involvement in the quiet times that were fed by and amplified by the chanting and by the prayer and by these other things, by the presenting of flowers. And then we'd have all-night ceremonies like Shivaratri, and we'd have India night, and we'd have the celebrations of the masters when they came into this world and passed. And in each case, what I found was a growing sense of connection to a part of life that I had never been able to access before. And the deeper I went in that, the more satisfying my connection with life was. The more I intuitively started to understand how life worked. I could start to feel what was happening with other people, what was happening inside my own reactive processes, my own sense of things. I could start to feel connected to life. I understood what was happening when I would go out in nature, but I didn't need to go out in nature anymore to have it. I could still have it that way, but I didn't need it as much. And then the mind could start to explain that, could start to help share and serve that, but it couldn't ever get there until the experience was there. And I realized it was because life isn't woven of thoughts. Life is woven of and made from love. And love is essentially connected to us through devotion. Now, we have the discussion back and forth about devotion versus emotion, and feeling versus feelings. And it's very easy to have feelings. We all have our feelings. I don't like what happened. I don't like it's too cold in here. They didn't treat me very well. We all have our, I really like mangoes. I really like Hawaii. I really like these things. And we just find ourselves up and down, and that's not what they're talking about. That is a part of the heart. That is a part of how we connect. Somebody said brilliantly the other day that things were made to be used and people were made to be loved. And what we have right now is things are being loved and people are being used. We have it just absolutely upside down. That it's not until we have a connection with life through the heart that we can start to feel our connection to the heart of others. And to not just other people, but other creatures, other parts of creation. But when we do have that, when we start to feel that, we just want to share it. We just want to help bring that experience into the experience of others. Yogananda spoke of his teachings, his churches, his temples being churches of all religions. And I want to read from Whispers from Eternity now. It's number 36. I tell my prayers. Number 36. Okay. I tell my prayers on the beads of love, strung with my devotion. I direct them beyond all names, God, Spirit, Brahma, Christ, Shankara, Krishna, Buddha, Muhammad. For all names are thine, and I shun no name, for I know thou dwellest in all forms. In thy cosmic dramas on the stage of time, and in thy myriad acting roles, thou hast assumed innumerable names. Behind them all, too, I know thy one changeless name, eternal, conscious, self-existent bliss. Many times have I played with thee, many songs of thine have I sung. On the ocean bosom of thy eternal life, I have been nurtured by thee as a tiny drop of life. I remember thy warm touch through the centuries whenever, feeling the chill of separation, I turned homeward to thee. Again in this daylight of remembrance, let me play with thee. Let me sing thy songs. We're in a time on the planet where increasingly people are they're feeling the chill of loneliness. They're feeling that sense of separation. And they're beginning to lash outward as a way of trying to deal with the anxiety and the fear and it's terrifying when you feel isolated in a world that's out of control and disintegrating around us. We either get swept up in that and try and think our way through it and try and act our way, but if our connection to life is feeling that this is separate, that this is isolated somehow, there's no place to stand, and we just become increasingly agitated. All of Ananda worldwide, Ananda Portland community, Ananda House at Laurelwood, Ananda Laurelwood, this temple and teaching center, the Living Wisdom School. Every part of it is born of devotion, born of love, as a gesture of creating an environment where people of all races, of all religions, of all shapes and sizes, all age groups, all genders and gender preferences can feel their connection, the very heart of life. That's the antidote to the fear and anxiety that's being generated. And our devotion to helping bring that into this world is changing the face of this planet. Ananda went from being Swami Kriyananda and a few people who were aspiring and inspired by the possibility of something back in 1967 through early 80s. Really, it was just a small group of people who could feel that presence of God, could feel the presence of spirit and the presence of life, and they just wanted to share it. But Swami would say to them through those years, he would say, this will be a global movement. This will touch every part of life. And people would look around at the dome and see all the leaks and the pots on the floor, and they'd see the dusty, dirty roads and the lack of economics and economic power to help make it happen. And there was no clear pathway to anything beyond just the small little group at Ananda village meditating together. But it is a global movement, and we are part of that global movement. We are, to the degree that our devotion connects us to life, we are a part of that movement that gives hope and possibility to a world increasingly troubled by egotism and fear and anxiety and hatred and war. There is a beautiful garden being developed out at Ananda Center at Laurelwood, inspired powerfully by this sense of devotion and connection to, not to a figure, not to a bunch of pictures, not to outer form, but to the movement of God's consciousness as love and kindness and world brotherhood and joy and friendship, way beyond reason, way beyond mental. The mind can justify anything. The mind can justify the arguments of Hitler and Donald Trump. It can justify this. It's not a joke. If you look at the kind of social unrest that was causing the uprising of Hitler, it's the same forces that are driving Trump to the forefront of public attention in this country. And there is every possibility that, and if you read some of the thoughtful people in this world right now, they're saying that there is a track through which Donald Trump could become the president of this country with all that implies. Be very careful about minimizing when you see that kind of movement, and it is the same consciousness that Hitler brought to the stage. It was the same kind of divisiveness and hatred and anyway, just we're in troubled times. And I would say, because we live a privileged life, I wouldn't use that to presume that the things we're hearing about out there are not true, and that the symbols and signs that we see out there don't have implications. And I would also say the most revolutionary act that we can make on this planet at this time is to express our devotion by creating environments that provide an alternative to that insanity, which is what Ananda is born for and doing around the world, and what you're all doing. One of those gestures, we're going to invite somebody up here in a moment, one of those gestures is a beautiful gardens that's designed to help hold the sense of world brotherhood in a way that's conspicuous, surrounded by beauty, supported by the consciousness that's being born and fostered at Ananda Center at Laurelwood. The Yogananda Gardens of the Northwest, Yogananda came to help fuel world peace and brotherhood. And these gardens are dedicated to that. It will have at the center of it an 8-foot+ statue of Paramhansa Yogananda with his arms outstretched in blessing. It'll be cast in bronze, and we have the extraordinary privilege and blessing to be connected to a man who, through his own devotion, through his own sense of yearning for the possibility, wanting to connect to the center of peace and wholeness and life and divine love, spent 10 years sculpting the face of Yogananda because he saw him as the harbinger of goodness in this world. And he's presented it. Do we have a copy of it here? Do we have that bust here by any chance? We should, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the front.
We'll show it. But anyway, he, as Janaki Devi and Vyasa have felt this movement of inspiration for this gardens, they contacted Gary Roller, who made that bust, and asked, would you be interested, would you be willing to develop a life-size statue of Yogananda in blessing? This was 10 years in the making. We're going to talk about an act of devotion. And it's become kind of an international representation of Paramhansa Yogananda and the love and the joy that his life represented. Well, about the time they called and said, we've been having this vision of having a garden with a full life-size statue of Yogananda, Gary said, I've been having dreams of a garden with a life-size statue, and I've always wanted to help create a life-size statue. And it's a special moment. It's a priceless movement of energy that's happening. I'd like to invite Gary Roller up here. Gary, would you come up and say a few words and just share what your process has been and the inspiration behind it as you feel? Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, please.
Thank you for that nice introduction. And you really set the stage, particularly with the theme of devotion this morning. And I got it. Oh, perfect. Thank you. With the theme of devotion, that is at the heart of not only this sculpture that he showed you, and I'll tell you a little bit about the backstory behind that, but and how this piece has evolved into this life-size, larger than life-size figure of Paramahansa Yogananda blessing the world. And I guess I'll move back a little bit. Some of you heard some of this last night at our gathering. It was beautiful. But this piece here began at a time when I really didn't know how to do any sculpture, very little sculpture. My drawing teacher in college was having little meetings at his home that taught in Amarillo, Texas, that was introducing people to meditation, some metaphysical studies, he and his wife. He was passing out books. He gave me Autobiography of a Yogi. So, like I said last night, that was pure gold in Amarillo, Texas in the early 70s. So I immersed myself in that. And at the same time, by being exposed to his work, I was absorbing through osmosis the techniques of sculpture. And I didn't even realize it. I thought I was interested in drawing and painting and music. So, longer story short, several years later, I was at a point where I wanted to express my appreciation and devotion for Yogananda, and I started having this vision of creating a bust of Yogananda, a portrait. And there weren't any around back then. You might remember there were no sculptures, maybe a few things sitting around in California. But so I started creating this mask of Yogananda slowly, and I didn't know much about sculpture. I would learn something, and then I would apply it to the piece and set it aside for several months, and I'd have another realization, a creative realization about how a technique could be done, and I would apply it to the piece. So that process went on. I wanted it to be as perfect to his image, his physical likeness, as I possibly could make it. So over the course of 10 years, I think I finally arrived at that goal. I had one cast in bronze. I sent it to Swami Kriyananda. I had visited Ananda and met some of the students.
Don't stop that thought. I'm just going to give somebody the advantage of watching your
watching
your mouth. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So I was too shy to actually talk to Kriyananda, but I met some of the people there, and they had come through Austin, Texas, and had helped. We had at our apartment, we let them stay there, and they had helped me with this piece. Kriyananda said, well, you know, and the people in his group said, well, you know, his smile's not big enough. So I worked on the smile, and Kriyananda said, well, there's a little bit of foolishness right here in the shape of his mouth, you know. And I said, well, I didn't realize that. So I learned about that, and he helped with the features, and he infused his personal knowledge of Yogananda into this bust right here. So now this is going to come to the 8-foot piece here. Now here, a number of years later, they asked me to do this life-size piece, and of course I had sculpted Babaji figure, and the small ones and larger ones, and they have gone out all over the world. People have ordered them, and so I have this. So, but what I'm trying to say is there's a progression, and I didn't really realize it at the time. But now looking back, now that we're working on an 8-foot piece of bronze, I realize there's a progression between my drawing teacher, being a sculptor, and my path being led to his. He gave me Autobiography of a Yogi. It came through that channel, and I think like all of us here, we are molded into being channels for some sort of a divine offering, and I think this was my path. I was disciplined by the 10 years of discipline working on this bust of Yogananda. That created the discipline and the techniques. Later evolved into this 10-foot or 8-foot bronze of Yogananda we're working on right now. So that's my perspective on that, and there's a lot of devotion, and while you're working on a piece like that, it's an opportunity for attunement to Yogananda's spirit, his personality, in a way that is hard to describe. Babaji, same thing. So it's an opportunity to open up intuitively, creatively, devotionally. Sometimes I would have to set the tools down and just immerse myself in the moment, you know. So if you have a way to immerse yourself devotionally in something like that, it's a meditative experience. So anyway, we went to the foundry. Now we're going to descend from that level to the practical level here, but we went to the foundry a couple of days ago, and we were very heartened by the fact that the foundry that's in the area can do virtually everything that we need. He or his resources that he can outsource from the foundry, and that made life simpler. We can have it done all right up here in this part of the country. We don't have to transport it from New Mexico or have work done other states. He's got the capability to do it all right up here. We saw a piece in progress of a life-size piece using the same techniques that we're talking about, and those techniques use modern technology of scanning the image. This maquette, which I'll show you, the model will be scanned into a computer, and that information will be used to cut foam into the proportions that we want. In other words, from a 14-inch model to an 8-foot tall image in foam, which we will go over with clay and re-add the details, re-add the refinements, the details that we're going to need. It'll look like the model, basically. So that's where we're at with it. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some resources, and once again, some devotion. And we invite everyone here. And I would like to see Ananda Village get on board and maybe open this to something that the entire Ananda movement can contribute to. If we have large numbers of people, everyone donates $10, it's a done deal, you know. So it's not a burden on anyone. So that's all I have. But afterwards, we're going to unveil it in here. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer your questions. And then tonight we're going to have some music. Is that right?
That's right.
And we'll have some fun. Okay?
Gary, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. One of the things that's striking about living from a place of devotion, a place of stillness inside and connection from the heart into life as opposed to the mind, is that most of what would be trying to happen, especially in times where there's dire need for spiritual connection, is that the mind will look around and say, it's simply not possible. There is no way. If you allow the mind to start to run, it rationalizes, it justifies, it shrinks down, it minimizes. But by simply staying connected at the heart, in stillness, endless miracles are possible. And just Gary's story alone, you know, the Ananda is the story of impossibility that's come into life through persistence, attunement, receptivity, and an unstoppable love for goodness and light and beauty and meaning. And this is just simply next steps of expression of that. Check your own life, check your own heartbeat, your own yearning for wholeness. If anxiety shows up, if tension and fear show up, the antidote is stillness, the antidote is meditation, the antidote is to be involved in a movement that's committed to bringing the solution, to bringing wholeness and goodness and love back into the lives of all creatures on this planet. This is from Songs of the Soul. I'll hand it to you afterwards. This is Yogananda's poem, Breathe in Me. Breathe in me the way to love you, that I may learn to faultlessly love you. Pour me the wisdom wine by which I become intoxicated with you. Whisper in my ears of silence the way to be with you always. Speak to my wandering senses and lead them back to your sanctuary within. Call the marauding mind and counsel it how to retrace its steps to your home. With your silent eyes, just look at me, and I will know where to find you. You may hide behind the ocean. You may hide behind delusion. You may hide behind life. You may hide behind dualities. You may hide behind theological conundrums. You may hide behind unanswered prayers, but you cannot hide behind my love. For in the mirroring light of my love, you are revealed. Yogananda said, the time for knowing God has come. Let's take a moment of silence.